Well, on the Sunday before Thanksgiving, I want to say thank you to our choir this morning for the beautiful music. I want to add my thanks to Elaine Johnson for the beautiful worship display and for all that you do in coordinating our worship. Terry, thank you for the beautiful stewardship moment as well. And I just have to say thank you to all those volunteers and staff who make it possible for us to worship virtually in this way. We have such a dedicated group of staff members and volunteers who make this possible, and I just am grateful for them this morning. So on this Thanksgiving Sunday, we want to think about gratitude, about Thanksgiving. And it's that story of the cleansing of the 10 lepers. Now, it's usually translated lepers, but you notice in the Common English Bible that it talks about skin diseases, because in the biblical concept of what's usually translated leprosy is much broader than that. It's some kind of skin disorder. It might include Hansen's disease, as we know it now, leprosy, but it could be any range of skin diseases. And that doesn't really seem like that big a deal maybe to us, but we have to put ourselves in the place of those 10 for a moment to think about the significance of what happened to them that day. The law in the Hebrew Scriptures is very clear about people with skin diseases. They can't associate with the community. They have to wear torn clothes according to the law. They have to go around shouting, "Unclean, unclean." They have to keep their distance, drastic social distancing for them, because they couldn't relate to the community. They had to, in Leviticus it says, they have to live outside the camp. They have to be separated from the community, separated from their families, separated from their friends and loved ones. Imagine what that was like, the life of a leper, to be separated in that way, completely separated, cut off from everything they knew and loved, from their way of making a living. They have to beg for a living. And so you can see these 10 lepers band together because what they share in common is this disease from which they are suffering. In fact, it is that common bond that even supersedes the divisions that would normally be there. Because what you have here on the border of Galilee and Samaria is you have Jews and Samaritans who are part of this group. At least one Samaritan we know is in this group of lepers. And so they have to live a life separated. But they need community, and so they have each other, and they've banded together in this way. Jesus comes along, and somebody recognizes Jesus, this itinerant teacher, and everyone says that he's also a healer. And so instead of crying, "Unclean, unclean," when they see him, they cry out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And so Jesus tells them to go and show themselves to the priest. Now, we have to pause for a minute to have an understanding of what that means. Only the priest could declare someone cleansed or healed of a skin disease. And so that was Jesus' way of saying to them, go and show yourselves to the priest and you will find that you've been cleansed. And as soon as they start to make their way, they are cleansed. And only one of them, though, the Samaritan, or a Samaritan, maybe there were others, returned to give thanks. When he saw that he was cleansed, he ran back and he fell at the feet of Jesus, praising God and thanking him for what had happened. And Jesus, when he saw this Samaritan who came to give thanks, he said, "We're not 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Only this one man came to give thanks. This foreigner is the only one who came to give thanks." And then he said to him, "Go on your way. Your faith has healed you. It might be translated, your faith has made you whole. One translation says, your faith has saved you. All appropriate translations of what happened to that man. Isn't it odd, with the new lease on life, the new beginning, the restoration of community and family and friends and all that happened, life going back to normal for them, only one returned to give thanks. And you wonder why. Why is it? What did they forget? Did they get too busy getting into their new life? Were they just so overjoyed that it just slipped their minds? Did they just take it for granted? What's that about? This story reminds us that we can forget gratitude, that we can get caught up in the busyness of our lives, or we can take things for granted in such a way, or we can be overwhelmed by the negative that we're experiencing, so that we forget to see the blessings. We forget the gratitude. And when we do that, it seems to me that we lose something that's fundamentally human about us. There is somehow we are wired for the need to acknowledge and to say thank you, aren't we? I mean, think about it. When you travel to another country where they speak a different language and you want to learn a few words, always one of the words that you learn is how to say thank you in that language. There's just something important about being able to express in the heart language of the person that has helped you in some way your gratitude and appreciation. And somehow when you do that, I don't know about you, but I've noticed for me, it makes me even more aware of gratitude when sometimes, frankly, it can just be automatic. Something we say, manners, politeness, as Mr. Mark said. But there's something about that learning the other language and speaking it that, makes me more aware of gratitude. So we have this story of the role of gratitude in one's life. And it calls to mind for me the words of a rabbi who talked about the meaning of religion. Harold Kushner is his name. And he said that religion is not a set of beliefs primarily. It's not certain prayers or certain rituals primarily, but he said religion is first and foremost a way of seeing, a way of seeing. And I think that's an important insight. He goes on to say that religion in and of itself doesn't change the circumstances in the world, but we see the world in a different way, and that can lead to changes. It's this certain way of seeing, and we see it in this story. The Gospel of Luke, when Luke recounts this story of Jesus and the 10 lepers, he talks about seeing in a way that he could leave out of the story altogether. He could say that the 10 lepers were there and they saw Jesus and they cried out to him, and that Jesus simply responded. But instead, what Luke says is when Jesus saw them, then he said, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." It could have said that when the 10 were on their way to the priest, one of them returned to give thanks. But Luke says, and when he saw that he was cleansed, then he returned to give thanks. There is this role of seeing in the story that I think is important. Jesus saw them. He really saw them. And when he saw them, he responded. Religion, Harold Kushner said, is a way of seeing. When the leper who was cleansed, the Samaritan who was cleansed, when he saw that he was made whole, then he went to give thanks. It is a way of seeing that really is transformational. G.K. Chesterton, the British writer I sometimes quote, he was the author of the Father Brown Mysteries. He's also a lay theologian. I love what he said about gratitude. He said, you say grace before a meal, and so do I, and that's fine. But he said, I say grace before a play or a concert or before swimming or before fencing or before boxing or before I dip pen and ink. And he called it his intoxication before life. It was a way of seeing that brought out, made obvious the blessings. Well, we find ourselves now with a very different kind of Thanksgiving, don't we? And it's easy really to focus only on that, on what we will be missing this year. Everybody I talk to is talking about these conversations in their family. We've had the conversations in our family that we're not going to have the big Thanksgiving gathering that we always have had. And it's such an important part of our celebrations. It's not going to happen in order for people to be safe. And over again, I've talked to people who've had that conversation and how difficult and agonizing that decision is. As Mr. Mark said, the decision to cease limited in-person worship for the time being was not easy. It was a difficult decision. And so in the midst of all this, we need a way of seeing. You know the movie Bruce Almighty with Jim Carrey? Jim Carrey plays a character called Bruce, and a lot of things are going wrong in Bruce's life, and that's all he can see, that's all he can focus on, and he's angry at God, and he thinks, well, if I were God, things would be different. And so he's granted a day of being God, Bruce Almighty. And it is, of course, a disaster. It's a funny disaster for a movie, but it would have been tragic in real life. But Jim Carrey, when he was interviewed about that movie, he said, it's a movie about not seeing your blessings, which is a common thing, he said. He went on to say that after making that movie, he developed the practice of making lists of his blessings, lists of what he's thankful for. And he talked about how transformational that was. This way of seeing, of moving through the day, seeing things in a different way and being mindful of blessings, even in the midst of difficulty. I think that must be what Paul had in mind when he said, be thankful in all circumstances. He didn't say be thankful for all circumstances. That would be unnatural. It would be impossible, frankly. But to be thankful in all circumstances, to find even in the difficult times of life that there are gifts for which to be thankful. Some people have started lists online of the gifts of the pandemic, they call it. It strikes me that that's a way of seeing that is able to spot, even in the midst of a pandemic, the blessings that are still there. It reminds me of Henry Ward Beecher's image of gratitude. He said that he said you can take a bowl of sand and put iron filings in it, and you can try with your fingers to find the iron filings, and you will not be successful. But he said, take a magnet and sweep it through the sand, and the magnet will attract the iron filings to itself. And he said it's that way with gratitude. An ungrateful heart can move through the day and not see the blessings that are there. But he said a grateful heart, like the magnet, sweeps through the day and is able to detect, to see the blessings of the day. Gratitude is something that is powerful in our lives, that helps us to see more clearly that it's not just the pandemic, It's not just conflict. It's not just strife or whatever is going on in our lives, in our world. But there are blessings to be had. And God is the source of those. We started our service this morning singing a hymn. That hymn was written by a pastor who lived in Eilenburg in Saxony in the 17th century. It was during the 30 Years' War. And this pastor lived in this and pastored in this walled city. And because it was a walled city, people who were escaping violence, escaping war, escaping pestilence out there somewhere, would come in for the protection of this walled city. But unfortunately, a pandemic broke out within that city. And in a fairly short time, he was the only pastor left alive in that place. His own wife succumbed to the disease. He was, at the peak of it, conducting 40 to 50 funerals a day. And it was even in the midst of that awful pandemic that he wrote a poem that was then set to music. Now thank we all our God. And he wrote it for his children as a table blessing. Pastor Martin Rinkart wrote these words, and we sang a couple of the verses, the first and the last. We heard those, but now I want you to hear the first and the second of those verses. Now thank we all our God with hearts and hands and voices, who wondrous things has done, in whom this world rejoices, who from our mother's arms has blessed us on our way with countless gifts of love, and still is ours today. Oh, may this bounteous God through all our life be near us, with ever joyful hearts, a blessed peace to cheer us, and keep us in God's grace, and guide us when perplexed, and free us from all ills in this world and the next. Now thank we all our God. May we have the eyes to see the blessings that are ours, and to say thank you, not just to God, but to all those who bless our lives. Amen.